Hello, everyone. In this session, we will examine historical examples of how regimes in transition from democracy to dictatorship or socialism have controlled the military and integrated it into their power base. In a democratic nation, the military must exist as an institution that protects the state. However, in several countries, regimes seeking prolonged rule have made various attempts to weaken the military's political neutrality or reorganize it around personal loyalty. Let us look at these major case studies one by one. First is the regime of Hugo Chávez and Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela. First method: co-opting the military through economic interests. The regime granted the military leadership, authority over key sectors of the state economy, including the oil industry, food distribution, and import businesses. As a result, the military top brass transformed from mere military commanders into a powerful interest group with vast economic stakes. Second method: altering the promotion system. Personnel systems were reinforced to prioritize loyalty to the regime over traditional merit and career-based advancements, raising deep concerns about professionalism and independence within the military. Third method: strengthening political control within the military. Political and ideological education expanded within military organizations and systems to monitor the thoughts and loyalty of service members were tightened. Next is the Daniel Ortega regime in Nicaragua. First feature cultivating pro-government militias analysts. Note that, alongside the regular armed forces pro-regime, civilian armed groups were active, playing a crucial role in maintaining public order and suppressing protests. Second feature integration of military and police. Power analysis suggests that, as figures with military backgrounds moved into the police and intelligence agencies, the independence of the military was undermined, and the coercive power of the state became centralized around the regime. Next is the Evo Morales regime in Bolivia. First feature reforming the military education system through new defense educational institutions. The government reinforced anti-imperialist and nationalist ideological training, pursuing policies to instill a new state ideology in military officers. Second feature: hierarchical conflict within the military. Some studies analyze that friction between officers and non-commissioned officers was politically exploited, thereby weakening the internal cohesion of the military. Next is the Robert Mugabe regime in Zimbabwe. First feature: mass replacement of military leadership. The regime sidelined the existing military elite and appointed loyalists, who fought alongside Mugabe during the Liberation War, to core leadership positions. Second feature: economic reward systems. Confiscated agricultural land from land reforms was distributed to the military brass, tightly aligning the interests of the military with those of the regime. Next is the Rafael Correa regime in Ecuador. First feature: reducing the military's institutional influence. The autonomy of the military organization diminished as certain pension and welfare systems, previously managed independently by the military, were integrated into the state budget. Second feature: reorganization of intelligence agencies. Rather than maintaining the military's independent intelligence capabilities, the regime expanded a civilian intelligence agency directly under the president to tighten control over the armed forces. Next is the Pathet Lao regime in Laos. Following the regime change, a significant number of officers from the former government forces were sent to re-education camps, effectively dismantling the existing military structure. Subsequently, communist guerrilla forces became the core of the new national army, completely restructuring the entire military organization. Finally, the Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. After taking power, a massive purge targeted a vast number of soldiers belonging to the previous government, leading to the near-total dissolution of the existing military structure. Furthermore, the regime mobilized young adolescents on a massive scale to form new military units and subjected them to extreme ideological brainwashing. As these various cases illustrate, while the methods differed by regime, several common features emerge. 1. Personnel reshuffling centered on loyalists. 2. The erosion of political neutrality within the military. 3. Co-opting the military using economic incentives. 4. Centralizing power by restructuring intelligence agencies and military organizations. Based on these historical examples, some observers draw comparisons between the military policies pursued by certain progressive governments in South Korea and those of certain Latin American nations. The most frequently cited examples are the Rafael Correa government in Ecuador and the Evo Morales government in Bolivia. Researchers who draw this comparison argue that strengthening civilian control over military organizations, restructuring military personnel and intelligence agencies, and altering the internal organizational culture of the military show somewhat similar trends. On the other hand, counterarguments exist, stating that such comparisons oversimplify nations with starkly different historical and institutional backgrounds. Therefore, this comparison should be understood as one political science interpretation. When analyzing cases from different countries, it is vital to maintain a balanced perspective that considers both historical context and institutional differences. Ultimately, maintaining the balance between the military's political neutrality and democratic civilian control is a critical ongoing challenge that all democratic nations must grapple with. Because the Republic of Korea possesses a world-class regular military and a robust ROKUS combined operational system, a blatant outright purge of the military like those seen in Latin America or Africa is impossible. Therefore, the left-wing regime in South Korea utilized a highly sophisticated and unique technique, judicial blades disguised as legality, and the eradication of mental and spatial legitimacy. First, a judicial coup disguised as due process, the framework of clearing past evils. While other dictatorships used extrajudicial violence or martial law to seize control of the military, the South Korean scenario applies a judicial frame called lawful investigation and trial, under the pretext of charges like rebellion or abuse of state power. They swayed public opinion to their side and legally purged military generals in the name of the law. From the soldiers' perspective, this stripped away any legal justification to disobey or resist. Second, the castration of the military's historical symbolism and spirit relocation of the Korea military, academy and integration of the three services. While Zimbabwe or Venezuela bought off soldiers with money and land, the South Korean technique removes the military's spiritual roots and pride, proposing to relocate the Korea Military Academy, KMA, the bedrock of the National Army's legitimacy, to the provinces to the point of de facto. Dismantling it and building apartments in its place is a highly sophisticated psychological warfare tactic designed to degrade the military's honor to the level of real estate value and crush the morale and pride of service members. Furthermore, the integration of the three services, Army, Navy, Air Force, which ignores the unique specialties of each branch, is another sophisticated neutralization method aimed at weakening the military's independent command capabilities. Third, attempts at civilian control via non-regular public power. Suspected to be subcontracted police, reports of subcontracted police appearing at protest sites lacking name tags and violating hair length regulations point to a very peculiar phenomenon. This is a method where mysterious outsourced forces or ideologically aligned civilian groups are deployed to the field under the guise of public authority. This suggests that when regular law enforcement attempts to move strictly by legitimate orders, the regime covertly operates an alternative force that it can manipulate, like its own hands and feet. The South Korean case is not a low-level, primitive military takeover involving the blunt wielding of swords and guns. Rather, it can be viewed as a 21st century hybrid military control technique that wears the mask of the rule of law. Judicial condemnation tarnishes the military's honor through media, manipulation, and propaganda, and exploits the internal chain of command in reverse to control the armed forces. It is a far more insidious and lethal form than the bribery and purge tactics used by populist dictatorships in Latin America. How does the United States NDAA monitor and respond to this anomalous military control? Let us precisely analyze from the perspectives of criminal psychology and international politics how the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, and its vast intelligence network monitor these anomalous attempts to control the military and allied nations in real time, and what mechanisms they use to respond at critical moments. To state the conclusion first, the United States views the collapse of any allies' military leadership as a direct challenge to Indo-Pacific security, and thoroughly controls it through the legal authorities specified in the NDAA. The U.S. does not just look at superficial military appointments. It activates a massive intelligence dragnet that peers into minute internal fractures within an ally's military in real time. 1. Human intelligence, and close monitoring by the Tactical Operations Center, TOC under the ROC U.S. Combined Forces Command CFC system, the U.S. military shares information daily with South Korean military leadership. If a civilian defense minister with no military command experience is appointed, or if an ideologically biased general who has lost the trust of the field is abnormally promoted, U.S. intelligence agencies immediately classify this as a sign of military privatization by hostile forces. 2. Allied military capability assessment clauses based on the NDAA. The U.S. NDAA, revised annually, contains classified provisions that evaluate the combined defense capabilities of its allies. If signs of a deliberate dismantling of the military's symbolism and combined operational capabilities, such as the relocation of the KMA or the integration of the three services, are detected, the U.S. Department of Defense defines this as a violation of the ROC U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty and an impairment of war deterrence, immediately reporting it to the White House and Congress. 3. Tracking the movements of non-regular public power, subcontracted police, etc., the movements of unidentified armed personnel or subcontracted law enforcement violating service regulations at protest sites are caught by the counterintelligence surveillance networks of the U.S. National Security Agency NSA and the Central Intelligence Agency CIA. The U.S. views this not as normal maintenance of public order, but as the early stages of an informal paramilitary operated by an authoritarian regime to suppress the opposition and citizens and tracks the individuals behind it. The U.S. step-by-step response mechanism in times of crisis. When actual security vacuums or the risk of miscalculation reach an absolute peak due to a regime's takeover of the military, the U.S. shakes up the entire playing field by mobilizing the legal justification of the NDAA and the operational control of the Oroka U.S. Combined Forces Command, Phase 1 Information Blockade and Infrastructure Monopolization, neutralizing the government if it is judged that the military leadership has been filled with ideologically biased figures. The U.S. completely cuts off the sharing of cutting-edge military intelligence, such as reconnaissance and satellite data, or shifts it to exclusive U.S. control. This measure fundamentally blocks the regime from politically abusing military intelligence or leaking it to hostile forces. 2. Phase 2 Independent Activation of DEFCON by USFK and reclamation of operational control. The moment a security crisis escalates due to hybrid provocations or a regime's miscalculation, the commander of USFK activates combined authorities to elevate the DEFCON level. As soon as DEFCON is triggered, wartime operational control OPCON of the South Korean military is fully absorbed into the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command CFC. At this precise moment, incompetent civilian ministers or political generals appointed by the regime completely lose practical command and order authority over the military. Control of the military leaves the hands of the regime and is forcibly reclaimed within the framework of the alliance. Phase 3 Regime dismantling via the NDAA and financial sanctions. Secondary boycott the U.S. Congress triggers sanction clauses within the NDAA, targeting leaders and their accomplices who attempt to build a dictatorial system by seizing the military. It freezes the U.S. based assets of judicial figures involved in military purges, political generals, and those who supported non-regular public power, and expels them from the international financial network SWIFT. In an economic crisis where the exchange rate is already highly volatile, around the USFK mark, these financial sanctions by the U.S. could deal a fatal blow by completely cutting off the regime's cash flow, the limits of an anomalous takeover that cannot defeat the alliance. The reason past left-wing dictators in Latin America could easily seize control of their militaries was the absence of a strong, institutionally combined alliance command structure with the United States. However, South Korea is different. No matter how much a regime stages a domestic judicial coup and purges military generals, as long as the massive constitutional defense walls of the ROK-U.S. CFC operational control and the U.S. NDAA intelligence network exist, the true movements of the military during a crisis are bound to be controlled by the alliance mechanism with the United States. Ultimately, a leader's miscalculation and anomalous military takeover will only meet its end by self-destructing within America's sophisticated intelligence dragnet. In our next session, we will analyze, based on various data, how changes in U.S. trade policy and ROK-U.S. relations could affect our economy and industries. If this video was helpful, please subscribe, like, and share it with those around you. Your interest and participation give us great strength in preparing more in-depth materials and researching South Korea's security and international politics, together from diverse perspectives. I will see you next time with even more objective and profound content. Thank you.